You ever notice how the mind works in whispers long before it ever speaks in words? How you can walk into a room full of people, smiling, moving, laughing, and still feel something inside you tightening, shrinking, preparing for a threat that doesn't exist? It's strange how you can grow older, learn more, see more, survive more, but still react to life with the reflexes of the child you once were. And maybe that's the quiet tragedy of being human. You keep meeting your present with the emotions of your past. You keep stepping into new moments carrying old ghosts. You keep trying to build a life with hands that learned fear before they ever learned confidence. And the most surprising thing is not that you do this. Most people do. What's surprising is how rarely you notice it, how subtly your mind trains you without your consent. Because fear doesn't arrive as a monster. It arrives as a whisper, a tightening, a hesitation. It arrives gently, like a shadow moving across a room. And confidence, true confidence, doesn't arrive as a sudden burst of courage. It grows the same way fear does, slowly, quietly, through repetition, through lived experience, through tiny moments where you choose differently than you used to. But you don't see this at first. You only see patterns without understanding their origins. You only see behaviors without knowing the lessons behind them. And so, you wake up one day realizing your life feels smaller than your heart, tighter than your potential, quieter than your spirit. You realize you've been living inside narratives that were never yours, reacting to life with reactions you never consciously chose. And that realization, the moment you finally see yourself, is both liberating and frightening. Because once you see it, you can't unsee it. Once you know the truth, you can no longer pretend to be asleep. And so the real question becomes, what has your mind been practicing? What has it been rehearsing without your awareness? Because whether you realize it or not, your mind is always learning something. Every silence teaches it. Every conversation shapes it. Every failure leaves an imprint. Every victory leaves a possibility. And somewhere along the way, fear became the teacher you listened to more than anything else. Not because you wanted to, but because you didn't know you had a choice. But you do now. And if you lean in, if you listen, if you allow yourself to see the subtle mechanics of your own mind, you begin to understand something profound. Your mind learned fear through repetition, and it will learn confidence the exact same way. This is where our journey begins, right here, at the edge of an old identity, in the space between who you've been and who you're becoming. And maybe, for the first time in a long time, you're ready to look inward, not with judgment, not with shame, but with curiosity, with gentleness, with a willingness to ask, what if I am not broken? What if I am simply trained? And what if I can be retrained? And that question, quiet as it is, becomes the doorway to everything that follows. Most people live their entire lives inside an invisible script they never wrote. They move through their days as if they're choosing freely, but their reactions are predictable, conditioned, inherited. And if you want to understand how deeply this runs, just watch people in the simplest moments. Watch someone arrive at a social gathering. They stand at the entrance, adjusting their clothes, softening their posture, preparing a version of themselves they think others will accept. You can almost see their internal monologue spinning. How do I look? Do I seem strange? Will they think I'm enough? This isn't insecurity. This is training. Years of micro-experiences sculpted that reflex. Watch people at work. Someone interrupts them, corrects them, disagrees with them, and instantly their body tightens. Their voice softens too much or sharpens too fast. They smile when they should assert themselves, or they shut down when they should speak. Not because the moment requires fear, but because their mind learned fear from past moments that look similar. The brain doesn't analyze, it associates. It sees similarity and assumes threat. It sees patterns and reacts automatically. Or look at families, the place where training begins. A child speaks with excitement and a parent says, "Lower your voice, don't be dramatic." A teenager expresses a dream and someone replies, "Be realistic, don't aim too high." A mistake is made and the room grows cold. A success is achieved and no one claps. These are not events, these are lessons. Lessons the mind absorbs quietly. Be careful. Don't draw attention. Lower yourself so others don't feel discomfort. Stay quiet to stay safe. This is how fear becomes fluent. This is how people learn to exist in fragments instead of wholeness. And the irony is that the world reinforces this illusion. Everywhere you look, people appear composed, confident, certain. So you assume you're the only one carrying invisible tremors beneath your skin. But the truth is, everyone is performing. Everyone is hiding. Everyone is carrying a history that trained them to shrink at the exact moments they should expand. And this illusion, this belief that you are uniquely flawed while others are effortlessly human, is one of the most damaging lies the mind carries. But when you begin to notice it, really notice it, something shifts. You start to see that people are not rude, but afraid. Not distant, but overwhelmed. Not superior, but insecure. And then something even more surprising happens. You begin to see this in yourself. You begin to see that so many of your reactions are not choices, but reflexes. You begin to hear the tone of your own inner voice and realize it doesn't belong to you. It belongs to every person who ever shamed you, dismissed you, belittled you, ignored you, or underestimated you. And the moment you see this, the illusion cracks. The automatic becomes visible. The unconscious becomes conscious. And this is the beginning of awakening, the moment you finally meet yourself without the camouflage. But awareness comes with a cost, and once the illusion begins to fall apart, you can no longer drift through life half asleep. You begin to feel everything more intensely. You begin to question everything. And that questioning becomes the doorway into the next phase of your journey. And once the illusion cracks, even slightly, the world you've always lived in begins to look different. Almost as if someone turned up the brightness on a screen you never realized was dim. You start to notice the micro reactions in everyday life. The way your shoulders tense when someone calls your name. The way your breath catches when you're about to speak. The way you rehearse sentences in your mind before saying them out loud. You start to notice how often you apologize for things that are not your fault. How often you shrink so others feel comfortable. How often you silence an instinct because you fear being misunderstood. And suddenly, the life you once thought was normal reveals itself as a pattern of small abandonments. Moments where you abandon yourself to maintain peace, to avoid conflict, to protect an old version of you that no longer exists, but still controls your reactions. And this noticing is uncomfortable, almost painfully so, because when you finally see the shape of your own conditioning, you realize it's not just a past you need to heal from. It's a present you need to relearn. That's the everyday illusion, the belief that your reactions are just who you are, when in truth they are simply who you learn to be. And as you stand there, watching yourself from this new vantage point, you begin to ask deeper questions. If fear trained me without my permission, what else have I been practicing? What else have I been repeating silently, habitually, without ever choosing it? And what would happen if I trained myself differently? If I taught my mind a new rhythm, a new voice, a new response? These questions mark the end of unconsciousness. They mark the beginning of awakening. Awakening rarely arrives in the dramatic way people imagine. It doesn't crash through your life like thunder. It doesn't announce itself with certainty. No, awakening arrives quietly, like a soft shift in gravity, like a flicker of awareness that refuses to leave. It's the moment you react in a familiar way, shrinking, doubting, hesitating, and instead of moving on, you pause. You catch yourself. You see yourself. It's that split second when you notice your own mind tightening, preparing for a danger that isn't there, and something inside you whispers, "Wait, why am I doing this?" That whisper is the first spark of awakening. It's small, almost fragile, but it carries an entire world inside it. Because in that moment, you are no longer moving automatically. You are no longer asleep inside your conditioning. You are observing your mind instead of being consumed by it, and that changes everything. Suddenly, you begin to recognize the subtle patterns that once controlled you. You notice how your body braces when someone raises their voice, not because you're weak, but because years ago you learned to fear that tone. You notice how you dismiss your own ideas instantly, not because they lack value, but because you were conditioned to believe that confidence was arrogance. You notice how you expect rejection even in safe places, not because people are unkind, but because your mind learned the shape of abandonment before it ever learned the shape of belonging. And the more you notice, the more the world opens. The more you see, the more you understand. But awareness is not gentle. It is not painless. Awakening is a doorway, but it is also a mirror, and mirrors show everything, including the things you've spent years avoiding. You begin to see the fears behind your humor, the insecurity behind your politeness, the defensiveness behind your silence. You begin to see that your behaviors were never random. They were survival strategies. And this realization is both heartbreaking and liberating. Heartbreaking because you realize how long you've lived in the shadow of an old fear. Liberating because if fear was learned, it can be unlearned. If doubt was conditioned, confidence can be conditioned too. You begin to understand that your mind is not a cage. It is clay, soft, shapeable, responsive to repetition. The same way fear took root through repeated experiences, confidence can take root through repeated courage. Not grand courage, not dramatic courage, but small courage. Courage in whispers. Courage in tiny decisions that slowly reshape the nervous system. And as this realization settles into your bones, something inside you expands. A subtle warmth replaces the coldness of self-doubt. A clarity replaces the fog of old fear. You begin to feel the possibility of becoming someone you've never been, but always were beneath the layers. This is awakening, the moment your mind stops repeating fear and begins remembering itself. The strange thing about awakening is that it doesn't make you feel more connected at first. It makes you feel more alone. Because once you begin to see your conditioning, once you notice the invisible threads that pull on your reactions, you also begin to notice how deeply unconscious the world around you still is. You walk into the same rooms you used to enter half asleep, and suddenly everything feels louder. The forced laughter, the polite masks, the subtle insecurities hiding behind bold voices, the small competitions disguised as conversations. You see people flinch at truths they pretend don't hurt. You see fear hiding behind confidence, chaos hiding behind smiles, longing hiding behind indifference. And instead of feeling superior, you feel sorrow. A quiet, heavy sorrow that sits behind your ribs as you realize how much pain people carry without speaking it. And this sensitivity creates distance, not because you want to be distant, but because you see too much. The world feels transparent, almost fragile, and you begin to move through it carefully, softly, like someone walking across thin ice. You listen more, you speak less. You observe the micro-emotions on people's faces, the way they tense at certain topics, the way they rush past their discomfort, the way they avoid the parts of themselves they secretly fear. And in all of this noticing, a different kind of loneliness appears, the loneliness of someone who feels too deeply in a world that barely feels at all. You start to drift away from people you once called friends, not because you no longer love them, but because you no longer relate to the versions of yourself you used to be around them. You try to explain your inner changes, but your words feel too big for their understanding. You try to share your awakening, but you realize awakening is not something that can be given. It must be lived. So you stop explaining. You stop defending your growth. You stop trying to fit back into spaces your soul has outgrown. And in that silence, a certain clarity deepens. But the isolation grows too. You feel like a lighthouse standing quietly while everyone else is busy sailing through storms they pretend don't exist. And when you try to dim your light to fit in again, it hurts. It feels like betrayal. It feels like shrinking back into a shadow you've already stepped out of. So you remain awake, you remain aware, and yet you remain alone, for now. But isolation is not punishment, it is metamorphosis. The cocoon is always misunderstood by those who have never been inside one. And as you sit in this quiet space between who you were and who you are becoming, you begin to realize that isolation is not the absence of connection. It is the preparation for a deeper one. A connection that doesn't require shrinking. A connection that doesn't demand self-betrayal. A connection that doesn't fear your depth. And in that slow, aching solitude, the next stage begins to form. Awareness doesn't just open your eyes, it complicates your heart. Because when you see more, you feel more. And when you feel more, you begin to wrestle with a dilemma that every awakening soul eventually faces. Do I speak or stay silent? Do I intervene or observe? Do I honor what I see or protect the peace people cling to? You start noticing the subtle harm people do to themselves, how they talk down to their own dreams, how they stay in relationships that dim their spirit, how they bury their exhaustion beneath forced strength. And a part of you wants to reach out, wants to say, you don't have to live this way. You're allowed to be more than your wounds. But you hesitate. You hesitate because you know how it feels to be misunderstood, how it feels to have your truth dismissed, how it feels when someone tries to fix you before understanding you. And you don't want to be another voice that people hear as judgment. So the conflict grows inside you, the desire to help colliding with the fear of hurting, the urge to speak colliding with the wisdom of silence, the clarity you've gained colliding with the boundaries you've learned to respect. And then there's the other conflict, the inward one. The moments you catch yourself slipping back into old patterns. The moments your mind reaches for fear, even though you now see the mechanism behind it. You become hyper-aware of your reactions. A hesitation here, a tightening there, a self-doubt rising from a place you thought you healed long ago. You watch yourself navigate these moments like someone observing a character in a film, someone you know intimately yet must learn anew. And this duality becomes exhausting. You're trying to grow while still living inside the remnants of your old self. You're trying to speak truth without causing harm. You're trying to be awake in a world that rewards sleep. And maybe the hardest part is this. You begin to outgrow the person you were without fully becoming the person you're meant to be. This in-between is where the conflict lives. This is where you feel torn. But conflict is not a mistake. It is a sign that your old self and new self are overlapping, negotiating, learning how to coexist. And soon, this tension will push you toward the next transformation, one that feels less like growth and more like collapse. And then comes the moment no one warns you about, the collapse. Not a dramatic breakdown the way movies show it, not a sudden explosion of emotion, but a slow unraveling that begins inside your chest, so quietly you almost miss it. It's the moment when awareness becomes too heavy to carry, when seeing so much becomes exhausting instead of empowering, when the sensitivity you once saw as a gift begins to feel like a burden. You notice every shift in tone, every crack in someone's voice, every hidden insecurity, every silent wound, not just in others, but in yourself. And the weight of it all begins to pile up inside you like stones. You try to keep up the calm exterior, the thoughtful perspective, the quiet wisdom awakening has given you. But inside, you feel tired in the deepest way a person can feel tired. Not just physically, spiritually, emotionally, nervous system, tired. You wake up with anxiety even on calm days. You find yourself dissociating in conversations because your mind is overstimulated by all the subtext. You feel overwhelmed by decisions that used to feel simple. And the worst part is the internal conflict. You know what's happening. You understand your mind. You understand your patterns. And yet you still feel them. You still fall into them. You still get pulled into old fears, even though you can see the strings clearly. This is the collapse, when the mind tries to upgrade, but the nervous system still holds the old programming. When awareness is ahead of regulation. When your heart wants to leap forward, but your body wants to retreat. And so you find yourself caught in the emotional crossfire of your own transformation, feeling like you're breaking for no reason, feeling like you're losing yourself, even though you're actually shedding a version of yourself you no longer need. You may cry unexpectedly. You may feel isolated even around people you love. You may question your progress, question your path, question the purpose of waking up at all. But collapse is not the end. Collapse is the clearing. Confidence cannot grow on top of old debris. Courage cannot take shape on foundations built by fear. You must break before you rebuild. Not because you're weak, but because you're evolving. And in the quiet moment where everything inside you feels too heavy, when you're convinced you're going backward instead of forward, something subtle begins to shift. A soft voice rising beneath the chaos. A whisper you almost forgot how to hear. The whisper of self, returning. Revelation does not arrive like a lightning strike. It arrives like a sunrise. Slowly, gradually, almost invisibly at first. It begins on the edges of your awareness, in tiny realization that seem insignificant until they quietly change your entire life. You wake one morning and realize that not every thought deserves your belief. You have a conversation and notice you are not shrinking. You are choosing. You feel fear in your chest, and instead of panicking, you breathe into it. And that's when the revelation begins. Your mind learned fear not because you were weak, but because you practiced it. And your mind will learn confidence the same way. Through practice, through repetition, through gentle exposure to moments where you choose self over fear. You start to see confidence differently. It's not loud. It's not aggressive. It's not about being the strongest person in the room. Confidence is simply the absence of war between you and yourself. Confidence is coming home to your body after years of abandoning it. Confidence is noticing the fear and choosing not to rehearse it. And this understanding frees you. You realize you don't have to fix everyone. You don't have to explain yourself to people who don't want to listen. You don't have to carry the emotional temperature of every room you walk into. You don't have to be the healer, the observer, the aware one in every situation. You are allowed to exist without analyzing. You are allowed to choose peace without guilt. You are allowed to accept that other people have their own lessons to live, their own fears to confront, their own awakenings to stumble toward at their own pace. And with this acceptance comes the next revelation. You are not responsible for healing the world. You are responsible for not abandoning yourself. You begin to create boundaries, not from anger, but from clarity. You begin to say no without over-explaining. You begin to rest without earning it. You begin to listen to your body instead of overriding it. You begin to choose spaces that nourish you instead of drain you. And perhaps the greatest revelation of all, you discover that confidence is not something you find. It is something you build. You build it through small acts of courage, making a difficult phone call, speaking a boundary out loud, trusting your intuition, letting yourself be seen by people who deserve to see you. Confidence grows every time you show your nervous system that safety exists here too. That safety exists in your voice, in your presence, in your truth. And slowly, gently, your inner world shifts. You breathe easier, you stand straighter, you respond more than you react. You stop fearing your own emotions. You stop assuming the worst. You stop shrinking your soul because someone else is uncomfortable with its size. You begin to inhabit yourself fully, not the version shaped by fear, but the version waiting beneath it. And this is revelation. The moment you realize confidence is not becoming a new person, it is remembering who you were before fear taught you to forget. Integration is the quiet miracle that happens after the storm, when the lessons you've learned stop being ideas and start becoming your instinct. It's subtle, it's soft, it's the final return to yourself. You begin noticing moments that used to terrify you, but now feel manageable. Someone's tone shifts, you don't collapse. A conversation grows uncomfortable, you stay grounded. An opportunity arises, you don't shrink from it. Instead of rehearsing fear, you rehearse truth. Instead of anticipating rejection, you anticipate possibility. Instead of abandoning yourself, you remain. Integration is the moment you realize you're no longer performing life. You're participating in it. You're no longer afraid of being seen, because you've finally seen yourself. You're no longer seeking validation, because you've finally validated your own existence. And something in you softens. A peace you once thought was impossible begins to settle into your bones. You start forgiving yourself for who you had to be when you didn't know better. You start loving the younger version of you who learned fear just to survive. And you start guiding your mind with gentleness, teaching it confidence the way you should have been taught, with patience, with compassion, with repetition. And as you integrate all these pieces, you return to the paradox from the beginning. Your mind learns confidence the same way it learned fear, through what you practice, through what you repeat, through what you choose each day. Fear was a teacher you didn't choose. Confidence will be a teacher you consciously embrace. And this time, you are awake. This time, you are present. This time, you are the one doing the teaching. And slowly, beautifully, you become the person you were always meant to be. Not fearless, but fearless enough to choose yourself. Not unbreakable, but wise enough to rebuild. Not perfect, but deeply, quietly, powerfully whole. And that is where your journey leads, into a life where fear may still speak, but it no longer decides, where confidence may still tremble, but it still rises, where you are no longer the student of your past, but the author of your future. This is your mind remembering itself. This is you becoming you again.